Why do some people seem stuck in immaturity? And what does this have to do with narcissism? Psychologist Jordan Peterson suggests that many forms of narcissism stem from immaturity, not just personality disorders. His perspective, supported by figures like Dr. Campbell, may redefine how we think about narcissism as a developmental issue. In today's video, we'll break down how narcissism, immaturity, and figures like Tate may affect the psychological development of young men. But first, is narcissism just immaturity stretched into adulthood? Jordan Peterson argues that narcissism isn't always a deep-seated pathology. It can result from failing to mature properly. He references studies showing that many young boys who engage in antisocial behaviors like hitting and biting exhibit signs of immaturity. Most of them outgrow these behaviors by age 4, thanks to proper socialization. However, Peterson explains that if this socialization process fails, it can lead to long-term criminal behavior and an inability to mature. Narcissism, in many cases, is simply prolonged self-centeredness, a form of immaturity that refuses to let go. So, is narcissism more about being stuck than being selfish? Dr. Campbell offers a Freudian lens on narcissism, suggesting it's a form of being stuck in a developmental stage, particularly the phallic stage, where over-assertiveness and competitiveness dominate. In contrast to dependency-based immaturity, narcissism arises from an exaggerated sense of self-importance, rooted in an aggressive, overly masculine mindset. This perspective helps us see narcissism not just as vanity, but as a developmental phase that has extended far beyond its expiration date. So why are so many young men drawn to figures like Tate, despite their narcissism? Peterson points to cultural figures like Tate, who have captured the attention of many young men. While he acknowledges Tate's flaws, Peterson argues that it's better to be an extroverted narcissist than a passive, dependent individual. This ties back to evolutionary psychology, where assertiveness, even when manipulative, can be seen as attractive in certain contexts. Peterson explains that women may be drawn to this assertive, alpha male archetype because of deep-rooted evolutionary traits, while dependent and passive men tend to be less appealing. This speaks to the complexity of human psychology, where dominance is often rewarded, even when it's rooted in narcissism. This means that breaking the rules during adolescence is not always a bad thing. Peterson discusses how young men often experiment with rule-breaking during adolescence. For many, this phase is a necessary part of breaking free from childhood dependency. He explains that boys who break rules in moderation tend to grow out of it, whereas those who either never break rules or constantly do often face developmental issues later in life. This exploration of rule-breaking helps young men establish independence, which is crucial for development. The key, Peterson says, is balance. Breaking some rules, but not all of them. So while the rebellion phase in youth is fine, there's a fine line between growth and getting stuck. Dr. Campbell echoes Peterson's ideas, emphasizing the importance of the golden mean, a balance between assertiveness and responsibility. He supports the idea that young men need to explore their rebellious sides, but only for a time, before transitioning into responsible adulthood. They both agree that the goal isn't to eliminate rebelliousness at a young age, but to use it as a stepping stone toward maturity. This balance is what ultimately leads to a well-rounded, successful adult. So we've seen how narcissism, immaturity, and even cultural figures like Tate tie into the psychological development of young men. But what happens when this immaturity goes unchecked? In our next video, we'll dive into the long-term consequences of narcissism on personal relationships and success.